This is how a Bulgarian cabbage farmer defeated the Golden Horde and became Emperor of Bulgaria. By the 1270s AD, the Second Bulgarian Empire was still standing, but much of its strength was gone. Royal authority had weakened, provincial control was uneven, and powerful nobles were acting with growing independence. The crown still claimed authority over the kingdom, but its grip was slipping. That weakness mattered because Bulgaria was facing pressure it could no longer manage. From the north came repeated raids by the Golden Horde. These attacks burned villages, seized livestock, ruined harvests, and left communities devastated. The monarchy still demanded taxes and obedience, but it could no longer guarantee protection. That failure was tied to the condition of the ruler himself. Constantine Teak was no longer in a strong position to lead. Injured earlier in his reign, he'd become increasingly dependent on nobles and court factions that pulled power in different directions. For the people living far from the court, this could not do. They were the ones losing homes, crops, and security while the state faltered above them. That was the world Ivaylo stepped into. He did not come from the nobility or military elite. Later sources describe him as a swineherd or cabbage farmer. Whether those labels were exact or simply meant to insult him, the point is clear. He was low-born and came from outside the elite. This makes his rise extraordinary. He became important because he did what the state had stopped doing. In areas battered by raids, Ivaylo organized resistance and led local forces against the attackers. He fought, but more importantly, he won. Those victories changed everything. They proved that the raiders could be resisted and that leadership still mattered. In a kingdom where the crown had grown weak and distant, success in battle carried its own authority. Ivaylo did not need pedigree, he needed results, and results were what he delivered. Each victory spread his name and drew more support. People followed him because he could defend them when no one else could. What began as local resistance did not stay local for long. As Ivaylo's victories mounted, his movement stopped being only a defense of villages and started becoming a challenge to the regime itself. Constantine Teak was still Tsar, but a dangerous comparison had taken root. One man had the title, but the other was actually winning. Once that became obvious, direct collision was inevitable. By the mid-1270s, Ivaylo was no longer a village war leader. He commanded a force capable of challenging the state. When Constantine finally moved against him, the result was catastrophic for the monarchy. The Tsar was killed at the hands of Ivaylo himself, and with him, the authority of the old order cracked. The man the elites could dismiss as a peasant had brought the crown down. But taking power was easier than keeping it. Ivaylo had risen through force and success in war, not through birth, precedent, or noble backing. That made him formidable, but it also made him exposed. He had followers and momentum, yet medieval kingship demanded more than victory. To strengthen his position, he married Maria Palaiologina Cantacuzene, the widow of Constantine Teak. The marriage gave his rule some continuity and tied him, however uneasily, to the dynasty he had overthrown. But it could not solve the deeper problem. Many Bulgarian nobles had no intention of accepting a ruler of peasant origin. That weakness quickly invited pressure from outside Bulgaria. The Byzantine emperor, Michael VIII, backed an alternative claimant, Ivaylo III, a man with dynastic credentials who could be presented as a more legitimate ruler. That widened the conflict immediately. Ivaylo was no longer facing only suspicious nobles and internal enemies. He now had to confront Byzantine pressure, rival claimants, and the same northern threat that had launched his rise. Even under that strain, he did not collapse at once. Ivaylo kept fighting, and for a time he kept winning. He defeated Byzantine-backed forces and showed that his rise had not been luck, but ruling a kingdom required more than battlefield success. Ivaylo's authority depended heavily on direct, visible victory. The moment that stopped, everything around him began to loosen. That moment came during renewed fighting against the Golden Horde. Ivaylo was cut off and unable to return quickly to the capital. He vanished at the worst possible time. In the capital, absence bred uncertainty, and uncertainty bred betrayal. Many nobles had never accepted him in the first place. Now they began shifting toward other claimants. When he finally returned, the situation had changed badly. The momentum that had carried him from the countryside to the throne was gone. His enemies were firmer, his supporters less certain, and a kingdom more fragmented than before. He was still dangerous, but he was no longer the single force shaping events. But Ivan III could not stabilize Bulgaria for long, and another noble, George Tartar, soon rose into power. The struggle had become a contest among factions, dynasties, and outside powers. By then, Ivaylo was fighting less for rule than for survival. Without broad elite backing or a secure dynastic base, his power could not survive prolonged setbacks. He had risen because he could act decisively when the state failed. Now courage and military skill were no longer enough. The nobles would not rally to him, Byzantium would not leave Bulgaria alone, and above all loomed the wider power of the Golden Horde. That led to the final irony of his career. Unable to regain power from within, Ivaylo turned outward and sought support from Nogai Khan, the leader of the Golden Horde. It was a practical move, but also a bitter one. The man who'd made his name resisting the Golden Horde now had to seek help from its ruler to remain politically alive. That is where his story ended. Nogai Khan had him killed. The sources do not fully explain the decision, but the larger meaning is clear. Ivaylo had been useful for a time, and then when he was not, he was killed. With his death, the movement collapsed because it had always depended on him personally.